The funicular left me on a white windswept plateau just after dusk. From there, I trudged up a lantern-lined path to Frostfall Resort, a timber labyrinth crouched beneath the spine of the Montcabot Range. The invitation had promised a sanctuary for the weary traveler, where your reflection is sculpted in silence. As a freelance travel writer, I'd reported on everything from Moroccan briades to New Zealand glowworm caves, but never on a hotel that asked its guests to carve their own likeness from ice. At the reception desk, a woman in a charcoal gray uniform greeted me with a smile so practiced it seemed lacquered in place. "Camille Druitt?" "Yes, I'm Marit Devereaux, guest liaison. Welcome to Frostfall. The thermometer is at 2 degrees tonight, but the wind chill should take us below zero shortly. Perfect walking weather." She said it lightly, as if commenting on a ski forecast. When I raised an eyebrow, she offered a cryptic wink and handed me a copper-embossed key. "Orientation begins at 7 sharp in the winter atelier. Don't be late. The ice remembers punctuality." The lobby smelled of spruce and distant fireplaces. 30 or so guests milled around, shedding coats and clutching the same gilded key I'd received. Most were couples or families, but a few were solo travelers like me, orbiting the hearth with the restless posture of people who'd read the same rumor online, that Frostfall statues walked once the temperature slipped below freezing. I set my suitcase in a lofted room whose windows looked across a frozen lake. The last red bands of sunset flamed out over ice ridges, while snow began to hiss against the glass. I unpacked thermal leggings, 2 notepads, and the voice recorder I used for interviews. Before I could wonder whether a room full of travel writers might be a burden on the staff, a bell somewhere deep in the lodge chimed 7 times. The winter atelier occupied a vaulted hall that smelled faintly of iron and eucalyptus. Blocks of ice taller than grown men stood in rows, lit from within by LED strips that turned them an impossible blue. Next to each block rested a trolley of tools: chisels, rasps, heat pens, and, most surprising, tablets wired to laser projectors. The whole setup reminded me of a laboratory disguised as a chapel. Marit clapped her hands. "Welcome, artisans. For the next 3 days you will participate in Mirrors of Midwinter, a ritual older than this resort. Each of you will carve a figure of yourself from boreal ice, harvested at the head of the valley. Our staff will project a 3-dimensional scan of your body onto the block. Your task is simply to liberate what is already there." A bespectacled man in his 60s raised a tentative hand. "Excuse me, does the statue have to be an exact copy? I was hoping to shed a few kilos in effigy." Polite laughter rippled through the room. Marit's smile sharpened. "Art may flirt with vanity, Mr. Pendergast, but tradition forbids deception. What walks at night must accurately remember who you are." She let that hang before continuing. "You'll work in pairs for safety. Frostfall is heated, but when the mercury outside drops below zero, accidents happen. Walking statues, sudden accidents." She was marketing menace like an amenity. I pulled out my recorder just as someone nudged my elbow. He was lean, Japanese, with hair shaved to stubble. "Partner?" he asked. "I'm Kenji Sato, sculptor by trade, tourist by luck." We shook hands. Across the hall, I noticed a middle-aged schoolteacher named Senora Ochoa paired with a shy teenager and clamorous influencer couple live-streaming the event to their followers. Everyone stood between their personal monoliths, half awed, half intimidated. The projector clicked on. A rotating hologram of myself hovered inside the ice, head cocked, hair loose, mouth slightly open in mid-section. The scan had been taken in reception without my noticing. Kenji whistled. "They waste no time," he said. Tools in hand, we began. Kenji demonstrated how to score outlines with the heat pen, its tip sizzling as it cut minute seams. I started on my shoulders, the cold burning through my gloves. Every fracture of ice released air older than recorded history, smelling faintly of salt and pine resin. Conversation bloomed between clinks and scrapes. Kenji told me he'd studied in Sapporo and come to Frostfall seeking fresh inspiration. I admitted I'd come chasing clicks and a paycheck. He laughed. At least you're honest. Most writers carved themselves thinner, too, on the page. By 10, my arms trembled from effort. The statue's face, though unfinished, already carried the anxious crease between my brows. That recognition jolted me more than fatigue. I set the chisel down. Let's call it a night, Kenji suggested. Tomorrow we polish. As we cleaned our stations, Merritt strolled past, checking forms with a curator's pride. Forecast says, -4 in an hour, she murmured, not quite to herself. Don't forget to lock your balcony doors. Ice adores moonlight. Back in my room, I wrote notes. Glacial blue lighting. Guests molding effigies. Staff, half cult, half concierge. And then brushed my teeth while the blizzard thickened beyond the panes. At exactly 11:37 p.m., the wall thermostat clicked from 0.5 Klausch to 0.1 C Klausch. I glanced toward the lake and swore I saw movement on the far shore, impale silhouette making deliberate progress along the wind-scoured crust. I reminded myself that isolation warps perception, bolted the balcony door, and went to bed. I did not stay asleep for long. A faint crunching, measured and slow, threaded through my dreams. When my eyes opened, the room held breathless silence, yet the sound continued snow-compacting under weight. I sat up. The balcony curtains billowed, though the glass was shut. Against them, a darker shape materialized, my own outline, one hand pressed to the pane, head tilted with eerie tenderness. The statue. Or something wearing my features, hewn from the block I'd left half-finished. Frost rimed its shoulders and cheeks. Beneath the ice, dim starlight refracted through bubbles like galaxies. I should have screamed or grabbed my phone. Instead, I moved closer, hypnotized by the impossibility. The duplicate regarded me with what appeared to be mild curiosity, like a naturalist observing a rare animal. Then it turned, soundlessly, and walked along the balcony rail toward the next room. Heart thundering, I sprang to the door, fumbling with the latch. But outside, only spindrift swirled over empty boards. The statue's prints trailed away across the roof, steps precise and balanced as a dancer's. I dressed in every layer I owned, pocketed my recorder, and crept into the corridor. A fire exit granted me onto the central courtyard, where snow grated underfoot like broken glass. Moonlight bleached the landscape, revealing more figures. A man with spectacles identical to Pendergast's, a small boy I'd noticed earlier, Senora Ochoa, in her thick shawl. They moved not together, not apart, but in a hushed choreography, as though each pursued a private appointment. Wind combed their hairless scalps, yet none shivered or slowed. I filmed for 60 seconds, then realized my phone battery was plummeting. Beached by the cold, only later would I notice the footage had corrupted, replaced by streaks of static and a low hum like distant surf. One statue approached the lake, knelt, and placed its palm on frozen water. A second settled beside it, cracks feathered beneath them, luminous veins that glowed until the figures withdrew and the ice sealed. What were they doing? Listening? Feeding? Worshipping? A sudden crack behind me spun my head. Kenji stumbled from the eastern wing, base slack with fear. "You see them too," he whispered. We crouched behind a drift. A glacial version of Kenji marched past, unaware of its living counterpart, eyes fixed on something only it could perceive. "That's impossible," I muttered. Kenji's breath smoked. Matching temperature, identical mass distribution. Maybe they're inheriting kinetic energy from the environment. I don't know. But watch. He pointed. As the statues converged near the gazebo, they began to circle, tracing a spiral whose center lay just beneath a mound of snow. The formation reminded me of ammonites or hurricanes. When the last figure found its place, all abruptly froze mid-stride. The sky had clouded over. Flakes fluttered thick and sudden. A minute later, the resort lights brightened as automatic generators kicked on. and every statue collapsed as though a puppeteer had cut their strings. Arms dislodged, torsos toppled, heads rolled and shattered to crystal fragments. I expected to feel horror. Instead, a wash of pity traveled through me, the way one might mourn broken instruments that would never play again. Kenji and I hurried back indoors before staff discovered us. In the vestibule, portable heaters thrummed, pushing ambient temperature above zero. My skin stung, but I sensed another change. Harder to name, some internal cord tightening, like an alarm set for a future hour. We parted with a wordless nod. I slept uneasily, half expecting frostbitten fingertips to tap at the glass. Morning arrived in peach and gold. At breakfast, chatter flowed. Complaints about hangovers and altitude sickness, but not one mention of nocturnal strolls. Pendergast sucked jam off his thumb, oblivious to the gash across his knuckle that mirrored a fracture I'd seen bloom on his statue's hand before it shattered. Senor Ochoa shuffled flashcards for the Spanish class she taught back home, though I noticed she paused between words as if searching for simpler synonyms. Kenji slid into the seat opposite me, eyes bloodshot. "Did you tell anyone?" "No." "Look around. They don't remember." He pointed subtly. Influencer couple Zoe and Landon were live streaming again, but Zoe mispronounced her own handle twice. The boy at the next table spilled cocoa and stared at it, seemingly unsure how gravity worked. Nothing colossal. Only hairline fractures in cognition, so small you'd chalk them up to fatigue. But I'd watched their doppelgangers fragment like dropped wine glasses. I swallowed a hard knot of dread. What happens tonight when they reform? Kenji rubbed his temples. Water freezes, expands, heals its own fractures. Maybe the statues will mend. Maybe they'll finish whatever they started. We discovered that day's session in the atelier had been cancelled. The blocks became unstable in the temperature swing, Marit explained, steering us toward yoga and spa alternatives. Your sculptures will be refrigerated until conditions stabilize. Lies, of course. Half the blocks were already gone, hollow pallets where our doubles had been born. The staff were concealing something, maybe decades old. Frostfall had existed since 1912 under various names, each shuttered mysteriously before reopening under new ownership. The storm that evening arrived ahead of schedule, barometric pressure dropping like a stone. Staff distributed candles and old-fashioned wool blankets should the generators falter. Most guests retired early, lulled by mulled wine. I saw them as snow-stranded travelers in a fairy tale, fed until fat and drowsy. Kenji and I formed a reckless plan. We'd find the refrigerated vault and destroy what remained of our statues before the cold stitched them back together. I checked the thermometer, minus 3.1 cc, and falling. We met near the service elevator. Kenji held a pry bar. I held a hammer, whose weight shocked me. The lift descended 2 levels, into a bowel smelling of chlorine and diesel. Pipes dripped overhead. We located a door labeled Cryostation Authorized Personal Only. Kenji wedged the bar. The latch squealed. Inside, floodlights flicked on, revealing rows of metal trays where statues lay like embalmed pharaohs. Some were intact, crystalline organs glimmering beneath translucent ribs. Others were bundled in tarps, as if ashamed of their incompleteness. I found my double on the 3rd rack. Overnight fractures had sealed into faint, wavy lines like healed bone. Icicles sprouted from its eyelashes. The face looked restful, even kind. "Quick," Kenji urged. "Smash the spine center of mass." I raised the hammer but could not swing. Instead, an unexpected whisper unfurled in my mind. "Let me finish the walk, and I give you what I take. You will write forever, never tire, never doubt." Madness, I thought, but my grip loosened. The statue's eyes opened, pale light swirling behind them. Frost hair lifted in non-existent wind. Behind me, Kenji grunted. I whirled. His doppelganger had risen, silent as snowfall, and clasped his real wrists in a frozen vice. Kenji dropped the pry bar, breath bursting in steam. The room temperature had fallen below zero, despite industrial heaters clicking red. Statues all around us began reanimating, torsos pivoting, feet sliding off tables with crystalline pings. Fight or freeze. I swung my hammer not at my own twin, but at Kenji. The blow cleaved its forearm. Shards tinkled across tiles like delicate bells, but the creature didn't bleed or flinch. It simply adjusted its grip. "Sodium chloride," Kenji gasped. "Salt shatters lattice." His words cut off in a choking hiss as the twin's other hand reached for his throat. I seized a bag of de-icing salt from a maintenance shelf and hurled a fistful. The pellets fused instantly to the ice, spiderwebbing fractures through Kenji's duplicate. Its chest burst like a sugar sculpture under a mallet, and the head toppled, shattering. The rest collapsed into a mound no higher than my ankles. Kenji slumped, coughing. Around us, more statues advanced. Some glided on grainless feet. Others stumbled, half-wrecked by last night's collapse, yet determined. We fled into the corridor. A heat duct rattled overhead, exhaling lukewarm gusts that slowed our pursuers, softening edges. But there were many, and the resort thermostat was programmed to conserve energy at night, ensuring the air never climbed far above freezing. Kenji gripped my shoulder. "We need the boiler. If we raise ambient temperature high enough, they'll melt." We sprinted up a spiral service stair to the engineering level. Through a porthole, I glimpsed the courtyard where statues resumed their spiral dance, glowing faintly in moonless dark. They were building something now. A ring of ice blocks stacked like a well. In its center lay a hollow, the exact dimensions of a human body. The boiler room was locked. I hammered the hasp until it sheared, palms numbing. Inside, gauges flickered. 55 cc, 8.2 bar. Kenji yanked red levers to maximum. Flames roared, pistons shuddered, and somewhere deep in the pipes, hot water began surging toward radiant panels and bathroom taps. Then Marit Devereaux stepped from the shadows, eyes iced over in literal frost. The temperature didn't seem to touch her. "You shouldn't interfere," she said. "Exchange requires consent, but denial counts as consent when given from fear." Her voice was two tones blended, one human, one like wind through stalactites. She raised a small remote and pressed a button. The boiler alarm screamed as intake valves slammed shut. Pressure spiked. A countdown flashed. 90 seconds to automatic vent. "She'll blow the safety," Kenji shouted. "Scalding vents will dump into the lake to protect the building. The statues won't melt." Marit smiled pityingly. I looked closer. Ice filaments threaded her pupils. Was she host to her statue's mind? Or had she surrendered and become refined into something beyond us? I realized with a flash of nausea that she had no reflection. In the low, oily window behind her, just a faint fog of condensation. I hurled the hammer. It smashed the pane. Sub-zero air crashed inward, fogging gauges. Marit recoiled. Kenji lunged, tackling her toward the busted window. She was impossibly strong, but he leveraged surprise, pushing her half outside. A howl of wind swallowed her curse before she slipped, vanished into storm. We had maybe 40 seconds. Kenji pried a manual override, reopened valves. Superheated water flooded radiators with a thump like giant heartbeats. I felt it in my shoes, the floor warming, the resort awakening like a bear roused early. Metal shrieked as pipes expanded. Somewhere above, glass shattered, followed by muffled keens. The statue's chorus discovering mortality. We ran until air grew steamy. Snow under skylights became slush. In the courtyard, doppelgangers sagged, features blurring. The half-built ring dissolved, blocks sliding into formless heaps. A few tried to crawl toward shadows, but limbs snapped under their own softening weight. I turned, expecting thanks to glow on guests' faces at windows, but most rooms were dark. Whoever still slept would awaken with half-remembered nightmares, and perhaps find themselves more solid, more alone. I tried not to dwell on that. When dawn finally pinked the peaks, resort shuttles ferried guests down to the valley, citing infrastructure malfunction. Kenji and I shared the rear seat of the first snowcat. Neither of us spoke until the resort faded behind pine trunks. "Your throat?" I asked. "Bruised, but functional. He rubbed it. Thank you. I wanted to say more, but exhaustion scoured words. I dozed, head against the vibrating glass. At the train station, we parted with the awkward courtesy of soldiers after battle. He boarded southbound tracks. I waited for the north. As his train hissed away, I felt a chill in my coat pocket. I reached inside and withdrew a shard of ice no larger than a house key. The piece I'd knocked from Kenji's double. It should have melted hours ago, yet it glistened, perfectly intact, pulsing faintly with internal light. I could see the ridged tracery of its lattice, clearer than any microscope slide. My train arrived. Doors opened in a warm rush, but I remained on the platform, snowflakes settling in my hair, staring at the immortal sliver, thawing yet never diminishing. A memory, an offer, or a warning. The conductor called twice. I closed my fist around the fragment. It did not burn or numb, it simply was, a presence waiting to be decided on. At last, I boarded, unsure whether the cold I carried belonged to the mountains behind me or to something that had stepped out of them wearing my face.